Hello, I'm Rebecca Flaherty and today we're going to be making a cute daisy pattern in Procreate using my pattern maker canvas. The one that I'm using here is called Distressed Glow and it gives you this nice texture overlay which we'll see coming through as we work on the pattern. If you don't have the pattern maker canvas, you can still follow along. You'll just need to make a layer to start with that has a diamond like this that goes all the way off the edges of the canvas on all of those corners. So to start with, I'm going to be working on this layer here, which says called Draw Here First, and this is an empty layer. So I'm going to grab a brush and I'm going to use this brush here, which you can find in my Freebie library, and it's the Stylized Florals brush set, and we're going to use this one as a stamp brush for our sketch layer. So let's just, oh, not on the right layer, let's stamp some of these up on here. Just put a few in like that, and then we're going to merge this down now. The reason that I draw above the sketch diamond to start with is so that if I wanted to move anything around initially, I've got the option to do that without also moving around bits of the diamond, just that for that first go. But once we've merged it down, it is okay to move bits of these. For example, if we wanted to rotate this, I know I've got a bit of that one, it would be okay to have some of that diamond messed up on the edge, as long as you've got it still intact in the corners. But just for that first go, when you know you might have to move things around, it's easier to do it on the layer above and then merge it down. I think this one's going to be pretty simple, so let's just move this one down a bit. I can see that could be a bit better spaced. So once you've got a few motifs stamped in there, we can duplicate this layer, turn snapping and magnetics on, and then we can drag this over to the side, duplicate this one and drag it up to the top. And as I do this, I'm looking for these orange lines intersecting, and then I know I've done it exactly halfway. The other benefit of the pattern maker canvas is that because this is a precise diamond, you will also see that these line up perfectly as well. And if you had something looking like, which one is it? This one. If it wasn't quite lined up, you'd see things like that and you'd know that you'd gone a bit wrong somewhere. Let's just undo that. So just need to fill in this part down here. So duplicate the bottom layer again and drag that down there. And then we can merge those top four ones together. And now that we've got those initial ones put in place, we can move things around and get the gaps filled in. So I can see this one here needs to be moved up a little bit. So we'll go down to the bottom layer and I'll just draw around this one. Tap to transform. I'll turn snapping and magnetics off for this one. Move that one up there. And then what I want to do is fill this space in here, and it kind of goes, it's the bit in the corner on all the sides. So this is where our extra section comes in. So to work on the corners, we need to delete this one on the top to start with, because we've made changes to this one. So we're going to duplicate this layer and drag it over to the left until it snaps into place there. And we're going to drag the bottom one over to the right until that one snaps into place. And if I merge those together, you'll see we now have an X instead of a diamond. And you can see if we zoom into the middle, that's another way of just checking that you've got everything in exactly the right place, because those will line up. So now we can fill in the edges with this one. If you want a more in-depth version of how this diamond method works, I've got an introduction tutorial to that method which goes into it in a lot more detail than this one, and I'll put a link to that at the end of this one and also in the description. So now that we've brought the edges into the middle, we can see this gap here is the one we need to fill. So we'll come down to our bottom diamond. I'll turn the opacity down on the top one, and I think I'll add a layer to put this brush in. Go back to purple that I was using, and let's just add one in there for now. I think when I bring it back into the middle, I want to bring this one down a bit. Maybe bring this one down a little bit as well before we merge it into place. So I'm going to put that one there, and then when we bring it back into the middle, we'll bring this one down. Let's merge that down there. and delete that one, and then we can duplicate this one, put our snapping and magnetics back on, and drag those back out to the side so we have our diamond again. And now we're going to repeat that offset, filling in these corners. Pinch to merge those top 4 layers together, and then we can see it's this one here that we wanted to bring down. So on our bottom diamond we can just grab this one, turn snapping and magnetics off, and then we can just bring that down a bit, put that one in there, and then maybe we'll just want to shuffle these two down a bit as well. There we go, and then maybe move this one across. I think those are probably all nicely spaced out now, but there's one way to find out, which is to test. So because we've moved things around, I'm going to now delete the layer above and go back to working from this one. Turn our snapping and magnetics on, and as I said, where we've cut bits out down there, it's okay if we cut stuff out from the edges as long as we've got this bit in the middle intact. So that's still going to all snap nicely there. It looks a bit messy, but we don't need to worry about that because this is just our sketch layer. And there we go. If we want to look at that in a more pulled back, zoomed out, we can swipe down with 3 fingers, we can copy all, and we can come up to our top layer, swipe down again with 3 fingers, and we can paste, and then snap that into the middle. You see those orange lines when I did that. And then drag it over to the side, merge those together. And then here you'll get to see it in a much more zoomed out way, and you can check that everything's nicely spaced out, there's no gaps that are too big. And I think that's looking okay, so I can delete that one for now. So that is our sketch layer all worked out. Now I'm going to do one more thing, which I think is to put some little dots on this layer. So I'm going to put some dots in, and I'm going to use from my Pattern Maker canvas and brush set, I'm going to use this mini dot brush and just put some little dots in on the canvas there, and then we'll repeat that, duplicate and offset to see how they line up with each other. Making sure that none on the edges are too close together. That's the main thing you want to be checking for here, that you haven't drawn one on the edge there and also up on there. So I think those are all nicely spaced out, and we are now ready to start on our pattern layer. So I'm going to bring down the opacity on this outside one, because we know we don't have to illustrate these, it's just the ones in the middle. And on our pattern, in our pattern group, we can start with the centers for the flowers, I think. So from this orange color here, and I'm going to use the tracing crayon, and it's on 18%. So let's draw a circle, hold, and then tap, and then that'll snap to a perfect circle for us. So draw, hold, tap, draw, hold, tap. Last one. And then on this one here, because this is going off the edge, we're going to draw that later in this extra group once we've done all the rest, by bringing the edges into the middle like we did when we did the sketch layer. So let's just fill these in for now. And then because we've used a texture brush, we're going to need to go in and fill those little gaps which appear. If I change the background colour to something dark, you can see we've got those gaps there that need tracing over. Make sure I'm on the right layer. As you'll probably know if you've watched any of my tutorials, I normally say that I normally fill these in Photoshop. If you want to know more about that, I'll put a link to that in the description. So Let's change the background colour to this pink. And we're going to do our daisy petals now. So we'll add a layer underneath and we'll use this nice creamy colour. And we're just going to trace over all of these petals, making sure that we close up the bottom, because if we would just draw around like this, when we come to fill them in later, if that's not closed up, it's going to spill out onto all the rest of it. So when you draw, you need to make sure you fill in all, close all those gaps like that. So then we go and fill them all in, and then you also need to go and trace around all those. Now we're going to add our dots in, which we'll add at the bottom, and I'm going to do some of these in a dark pink. Just try and do kind of every other one, I think, as best I can. And then the other ones we'll do in a light pink. And now we're going to add some shading to the flowers. So the way I like to do this is using clipping masks and blend modes. So I'm going to add a layer above the daisy petals, and I'm going to clip it down to the layer below, and I'm going to make my blend mode colour burn, and I'm going to set the opacity to 40%. And then using a 50% grey, if you just double tap in this area, it will snap to a 50% grey. And I'm going to use my gradient texture large for this one. I'm just going to add a little bit of darker colour to the centre of these petals. I don't know if you can see that there. So that's with and that's without. And that's just using this grey and the colour burn. And then we're going to add a touch of lighter colour to the outsides of the leaves. So we'll go back to our daisy layer, add a layer above it, and we'll make this one colour dodge and 40%. So colour burn to do darker shading and colour dodge to do lighter shading. My brush a bit bigger, and we'll just put a touch of this onto the outside of the petals there. Hopefully you can see that coming through. So that's with and that's without. Just go ahead and do the rest. And now I'm going to add a bit of shading to these orange centres of flowers. So in exactly the same way, I'm going to add a layer above, clip it down, and we'll make this one colour burn 40. With a brush a bit smaller for this one, and we're just going to add a touch of that darker shade to the bottom right bits of these flower centres. And then we're going to add a bit of lighter highlight on the top left. So we'll add a layer in between there. Make this one colour dodge 40%. And just add a touch of lighter colour to the top there. You can see that nice texture we've got there. It's partly down to the texture brush that I've used, the gradient texture brush, but it's also this overlay texture there. So that's what you'll have without the overlay textures. And then if we add those in, that's the effect you get. And then the next thing to do is to work on this one in our extra section so that we don't have to have it cut off at the edges. So I'm going to turn off my texture, swipe down with 3 fingers, copy all. I'm going to turn on the extra group and hide the pattern one. And in this extra layer there, I'm going to swipe down and I'm going to paste, and that's going to put all of those back in there. And I'm going to duplicate this layer, and just like we did when we were sketching into these corners, we're going to bring the edges into the middle. And then we've got this one here which we can work on, and I'm going to go ahead and illustrate that in exactly the same way as I did with all the others. So that is now all of our motifs done. The next thing we can do is to put this pattern together. So I'm going to duplicate this extra group, If you don't have enough spare layers to duplicate a whole group at any point, you've got two options. You could either just go out into your gallery and duplicate the whole canvas, and then you keep one that's got layers and then you keep another one that you flatten. Or if you do have a few layers, what you could do, you can turn off all of your other layers except the one that you want to flatten, and I'm going to hide this pasted layer and my extra bit, and we'll hide the sketch and the background colour, and then you could swipe down with 3 fingers to copy all, and then you can paste that above your layers section. So there's 3 options. You can either duplicate and flatten a group. If you've got a few spare layers, you can use the hide everything else and copy all. If you don't have any spare layers, you could just duplicate the whole document and keep one intact and one that you flatten. The main point is that we don't want to flatten this extra group. Well, we don't want to flatten any of these layers here, either our pattern or our extra, without having an intact copy to go back to and change stuff later. So there's our extra group flattened. What we want to do now is put that back on the edges. So let's grab any old brush, make sure it's not alpha locked, and we're going to put a mark going off the edges of these 2 corners. I'm going to duplicate this layer, and just like when we did when we made the X back into a diamond, that's what we're doing now by putting this back in its position on the edges. And then we can rub out these marks there, and then I'm going to show my pattern layer now. Hide the pattern marker, and I've got enough layers, so I'm going to duplicate and flatten this one. Then I'm done with my layers group, so I can hide that one. I'll put the background colour back in, unalpha lock this. I'm going to merge it with the extra, and this is all on one layer now. I'm going to make that mark in the corners again, and then we can build out our pattern tile. Normally I would do this in Photoshop afterwards using smart objects, which allows me to keep each one of these in a group, and any changes you make to that group will update on the rest of the groups in the canvas. If you want to know more about that, I've got a video about that which I'll link to in the description. So that is now our pattern tile built out. There's one thing left to do, and that's to turn on our overlay textures. I'm going to zoom in nice and big so you can see the difference and it makes with and without. So that's our flat pattern, and then that is with the overlay textures put in. So that is a completed pattern tile now. That's fully seamless. We could upload this to Spoonflower or Redbubble if we saved it as a JPEG or a PNG. What we're going to do now is to fill the whole canvas with this in repeat, just to check it's working properly. So let's swipe down with 3 fingers and tap copy all. We'll come right up to our top layer, swipe down with 3 fingers to paste, and then we will snap this to halfway so we've got those orange lines there. Duplicate this over to that side, pinch those together and duplicate that underneath. And then before I pinch these together, if I turn off everything underneath and we show and hide this one, and we zoom right in on that seam there, you can see that's all fully seamless, both the design that we made and those seamless textures. There's no gaps or joins there where the textures overlap. You can find this canvas in my Etsy shop. It's from my Boho Brights Volume 2 collection. This one is called Distressed Glow. And if you are a subscriber to my newsletter, you can get 10% off. You can also get these stamp brushes and the palette to have a go at making this pattern yourself. If you share your patterns on Instagram, don't forget to tag me at @BeckyFlatty because I love to see them.